Hi, we are now looking at 7.2 and this says addition and subtraction formulas or sum and difference formulas. So here we are going to see how we can find the trig functions of two when we are given the angle which is in terms of sum of two angles or as a difference of two angles. So in other words, we will now be able to evaluate the trig functions for more values points on the circle on the unit circle than we had. So for example, we know what is sine and cosine of pi over 6, and we also know what is sine and cosine of pi over 3. Now pi over 3 minus pi over 6. So let's see what that gives us. So you see this is 6. Well, that will give us pi over 6 because pi over 3 is 2 pi over 6, right? So we get pi over that's not interesting. But what about pi over 3 plus pi over 6? So we get that is also not interesting. Okay, so what about pi over 3 minus pi over 4? So if I have pi over 3 minus pi over 4, then common denominator, and you get 4 pi minus 3 pi, so we get pi over 12. So now it means we can find the because pi over 12 can be written as a difference of two values which are on the unit circle whose trig functions we know. So we can now find the trig function for pi over 12 and so on. So what are the difference sum and difference formula? This is excuse me. So, and these are the ones that I mentioned in the beginning about those I think they were the cosine of, you saw these type of identities, cosine of pi over 2 minus x, or sine of pi over 2 minus x, or a bunch of things. So I said you don't need to memorize them. You can use these formulas now to evaluate if you see something like that. So notice here, and these you have to kind of memorize again. So these are 4 of them, 2 for sine, 2 for cosine. So try to look at the pattern and try to remember them as the pattern. So sine of x plus y is equal to sine of x times cosine of y plus cosine of x times sine of y. So in the sine expression, let's look at the second one. So sine of x minus y is equal to sine of x times cosine of y minus cosine of x times sine of y. So you note here that when we have the sine of the sum or sine of the difference, the terms that we get, the two terms, first is sine of x times cosine of y, and second is cosine of x times sine of y. So both of these terms, these two terms are the same, these two terms are the same. The only difference is that when you have a plus here, you get a plus in between these terms. When you have a negative sign here, you get a negative sign in between these two terms. So this is how you have to remember. For sine, when we sine of x plus y, kind of when we expand it, gives us sine of x, cosine of y, and the other term will be cosine of x, sine of y, and in between, if there is a plus sign here, you get a plus sign in between these two. If there is a negative sign here, you get a negative sign in between these two. So that is your sine. Now what about the cosine? So cosine of x plus y. So in this case we start with the cosine, and it is cosine and cosine. So cosine x times cosine y, and the second will be sine x times sine of y. But here the sign is reverse, or if there is a plus sign here, you get a negative sign here, and if there is a negative sign here, looking at this formula, you get a plus sign there. But notice these two terms are the same, these two terms are the same. So now once we have sine and cosine, you know that we can find the tangent. Tangent will be just sine of the sum or the difference divided by the cosine of the sum or the difference. So let's try to see how we use them. So example 1, using the addition or subtraction formula to find the exact value. So sine of 15 degrees. So the first thing you have to figure out is 15 degrees is the combination of which two known angles. Known angles means the angles whose sine cosine function you know. So which are 0 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, 90, 120, and so on, 150, 180, and so on. Okay, now we have to pick some from here, some angles from here, and try to see if we can write 15 as a sum of two of those angles or as a difference. Well, we cannot have sum, because remember these are all bigger than 15 except the 0 one. So we should be thinking about difference here. So 15, can you see, can be written as 45 minus 30. So we have 45 degrees minus 30 degrees is equal to 15 degrees. Also 60 degrees minus 45 degrees is also 15 degrees, right? And maybe you can find more, but yeah, there is something like 135 degrees here, that way. So you can pick any, you can use any. So let's just use this one. So because 15 can be written like this, so I say sine of 15 is actually sine of 45 degrees minus 30 degrees. And now we will apply the formula. So this is a sine difference of the sine of the difference, sorry. So it will be sine of 45 degrees times cosine of 30 degrees minus cosine of 45 degrees and sine of 30 degrees. So which is equal to, now sine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of 30 is square root of 3 over 2 minus cosine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2. Sine of 30 is 1 over 2. So I get square root of 6 over 4 minus square root of 2 over 4. So take the common denominator and on the top, so that is the value. Next, cosine of 75 degrees. Now, how can we look at that one? Again, now we have to think about how can we express the 75 degrees in terms of as a sum or difference of the known angles. So 75 degrees, can we think of it as 30 plus 45? Yes, we can. And if you want to write it as a difference, then you have to go and do a little bit more higher angles. So I think this is should be fine. So we can now say this is equal to cosine of 30 degrees plus or cosine of 45 plus 30. It doesn't matter which one you put first, but this will be equal to cosine of 30 degrees times cosine of 45 degrees minus sine of 30 degrees into sine of 45 degrees, which is equal to, so cosine of 30 is square root of 3 over 2, cosine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2, minus sine of 30 will be sine of 30 1/2, sine of 45 square root of 2 over 2. So simplify, we get square root of 6 over 4 minus square root of 2 over 4. Simplify. Okay, note that this value is exactly the same as the value that we found here. Why is that so? The reason is because if you draw a right triangle, where one of the angle is 15, okay, and let's say where one of the angle is 15, let's say this is 15 degrees, then how much is this one? So you remember the sum of the angles will be 90, so this one will be 90 minus 15, and what is that? That is 75. So if you recall, if this is A, this is B, and this is C, then the sine of 15 will be A over C, and cosine of 75 will be A over C. The cosine of 75 will be the same as sine of 15. That's why we are getting the same value here. Okay, the next one is tangent of 165 degrees. So first thing is we have to figure out how can we write the 165 degrees in terms of the known angles, and then we have to, because it's a tangent, so it means we have to find the sine and the cosine and then divide the values. Okay, so we start by thinking that 165 can be written as what? So you can try on a scrap paper bunch of numbers and see which one fits. So for example, if I say 180, so what should I subtract from 180? If I subtract 45, will that give me? Because if I subtract 30, I will not get 165, because both of them have a 0 as their last digit on the, or you can say unit digit. So we are not going to get a 165. So let's try 180 minus 45. So ten minus 5 is 5 and 7 left here. So 7 minus 40. 7 minus 4 is 3. And so we get 135. We are not getting 165. So which means try something else. How about 180? How about 120 plus 45? How about that? 120 plus 45. What will that will give us? 165. So we can use that. So let's say, so our angle, I will find first sine of 165, because this can be written as sine of 165 over cosine of 165. Now sine of 165 will be sine of 120 plus 45, which will be equal to, let me erase this just for space. Okay, so we have equal to sine of 120 times cosine of 45 plus cosine of 120 times sine of 45, which is equal to, so sine of 120, remember 120 is in the second quadrant and sine is positive, so it will be the same as what we have for sine of 60, so which is 3 square root of 3 over 2. Now cosine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2 plus cosine of 120. Now cosine of 120, because cosine is in the 120 degrees in the second quadrant, so cosine will have a negative value, but the value will be the same as the cosine of 60 degrees, which is 1/2. So I get negative 1/2 times sine of 45, which is now you might say, oh, it came the same again. Yes, and you should be able to tell me why they are coming to be the same. Now we find cosine of 165. So this will be cosine of 120 plus 45, which means cosine of 120 times cosine of 45 minus sine of 120. Why minus? Remember, in the cosine, when you have a plus here, angle, you have a sum of angles, then the formula says we get a negative sign here. Okay. Plugging in the values, cosine of 120, remember, is negative 1/2. Cosine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2 minus sine of 120 is just square root of 3 over 2, and sine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2. So we end up getting negative square root of 2 over 4 minus square root of 6 over 4. Okay, so now tangent of 165 will be equal to this value divided by this value. So we have square root of 6 minus square root of 2 whole divided by 4 divided by negative square root of 2 minus square root of 6 whole divided by 4. So when you simplify, you end up getting so this is what you get. Now this is the correct answer, it's the exact value, but usually, like, there are too many negative signs. So what we can do is from the bottom we can factor out the negative sign. So we get negative square root of 6 plus square root of 2, and we can factor the negative sign from the top as well. So we get square root of 2 minus square root of 6, and now the negative cancels out, so final answer will be square root of 2 minus square root of 6 over square root of 2 plus square root of 6. Okay, next one, sine of negative 5 pi over 12. Now this is kind of hard, like this is pi over 12 now. So if you can find it easily, fine. Otherwise, you can try to convert it to degrees, because in degrees it's easier to see. So remember, 5 pi over 12 will be equal to 5 into 180 over 12. So 5 into 15. 12 ones are 12, 12 fives are 60. 5 into 15 means 75. So which means now we have negative 5 pi over 12. So we have negative 75 degrees. So how will you now look at that? So negative 5. So I will actually let you guys try this, then come back.